Hi guys. It's only the two of us today, but we're really, really delighted to welcome Keith from Our Duty, who is a fabulous part of our movement. And he is part of a huge organisation now, which is an international peer support group, who look after lots of parents who are basically have children who are going through this thing which is commonly known as rapid onset gender dysphoria, but my understanding is that you call it something different, which is about transgender ideation, and you have like a whole philosophy about this, and we're really, really delighted for you to come on and tell us a bit more about it, and we can talk about all the things that are really bothering us and bugging us at the moment. So Keith, you're really welcome to join us.
Thank you very much for having me on.
No problem. So tell us a little bit about Our Duty and what your kind of story is and everything that's going on with you guys.
I was personally affected by this common story of having a child transitioned at school when she was only 16, and she's now well into her 20s. So about 8 years ago, this all kicked off for me. And at that time, there was very little information around. In fact, there were two websites, Transgender Trend in the UK and Fourth Wave now in the United States.
Right.
Were the only places really questioning what on earth was going on. And I scrabbled around and tried to put things together and was wondering what on earth to do, because instinctively I knew that the whole idea of sex change was just ridiculous for a child. It's just bonkers in my view. And I spoke to Stephanie Davies-Rye way back, it must have been early 2018. And I said, well, does Transgender Trend do parent peer support? And she said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, getting parents together, it's a well-known way of helping people who are in this traumatic situation by just getting parents together and helping them to help each other. So that was the original vision I had for what I would like to do, and I originally volunteered to do it within, under the auspices of Transgender Trend. Somehow it took on a life of its own, and we grew on Twitter as a Twitter group without a name. And then we had our first real life meeting on the 5th of December 2018 in a pub in London with 6 parents attending. And at the time, we went, we were trying to brainstorm what was going on. And I noticed that Barry actually came to a very similar conclusion when he started broadcasting on this subject. He was saying, oh, well, it's all body dysmorphia, and and you realize that, yes, but that's only just one part of it, and there's so much more, and we have learned so much over the 5 years since then, and we've developed our practice, and we're getting better every week at helping parents, guide them to help each other to get through that. And that's only one part of what we do now. And what we do can be summarized in the acronym SAVE, S-A-V-E, with S standing for support, which is our original purpose, A standing for activism, and you'll notice that our West Coast American chapter are doing a lot of that. V stands for voice, or the V in advocacy, whichever you prefer. And that's really about being the voice for parents, because for a lot of reasons they cannot necessarily speak up for themselves. One, they're very interested in protecting the identity and privacy of their children. In the current environment, they have to protect their own identity as well, because if they're speaking up against this ideology, they could easily get cancelled, lose their jobs, and so forth. So we try to be the voice of parents. And the last one, E, is education. So we try and publish as much information to the wider world as we can. So when we talk about education, we're not talking about, working in schools and that sort of thing. We're talking about educating the wider world, what on earth is going on here. So we've grown. Yeah, we've got about 2,000 people on our books now. We have active chapters in Australia, Canada, 2 in the United States, and obviously our original one in the United Kingdom. Yeah, that's where we are now.
Wow, that's incredible. That's a lot of work. I mean, I certainly know I deal with a lot of parents who've got children who've taken on a trans identity and believe, who are believing in this. And it's really, really traumatic to try and unpick their stories and to try and support them. And I always, refer them on to either yourselves or Bayswater so that they can get some peer support, because that's obviously incredibly important. So I mean, obviously there's huge amounts going on in the press. There's article after article. We're really we couldn't ask for more traction at the moment because of all the work that we've been doing in the background to try and push the whole schools issue around social transition. So what was your thoughts over the last few days about some of the articles that have come out and some of the tensions with regards to this guidance that we've been waiting for about what's happening in schools?
Well, isn't it great that it's being spoken about in Parliament? Isn't it great that we've got members of Parliament like Miriam Cates and Nick Fletcher, who actually have got quite a sound understanding of what's going on and what needs to happen. And both of them, I noticed, called for an outright ban on social affirmation in schools. And that's something that, I think any person who understands all the issues at play can fully get behind.
Yeah, I mean, we're Barry and myself and Robbie, as you know, are hardline on all of this. I mean, Barry, you've obviously been fully engaged and churning out video after video. You've been doing incredibly well on this. I mean, I'll tell you what I think in a minute, but what was your sort of thoughts over the weekend?
Well, I've never been busier.
Yeah.
We've got so much coming out, and in amongst all of it, you have to find something that's a bit amusing, otherwise you go around the bend. But it's what we've seen is very, very important, that we're seeing things coming to the light. I noticed that there was an article about John Money, Daily Mail, and that's going to be, and I reposted a video, which is an old documentary about that chap's machinations and what he got up to recently. But what we're seeing is a shift. I think it seems to feel like a shift. Now, I'm very well aware of what Nick and Miriam have been up to, and laudable work that they're doing. They're the same as Keith with his parents, which is just fantastic. And we're seeing movement in this field in all areas. My warrior teachers are all over the place right now. They all bumped into each other at a meeting yesterday in Hyde Park.
I met one of them actually on Saturday at a conference that I was at, and he was telling me what he was doing, and I was like, "Are you a warrior teacher? Because it sounds like it from what you've been doing." And he was.
Yeah. See, so there's some tremendous stuff going on with enormous amounts of parents being spoken to by these people, which is really feeding into the whole thing. I was interested in particular to see the article today from Miriam Cates calling for a transparency law or a transparency, I don't know what it would be, but it'd have to be a law, I suppose, saying that all curriculum materials must be available, which was incredibly interesting because that's the same thing as Donald Trump said on the 10th of June. It's funny how this is all coalescing, and it's extraordinary to me. I don't know if you've seen Trump's speech.
I did see that.
He nails it. Well, whoever wrote it nailed it. Let's put it that way. But again, that echoes with something that Putin said, and that's now doing the rounds as well. It's most peculiar to see two men of the caliber they are, and B, who they are, coming together to say exactly the same thing. It's almost like the horseshoe is just about to join, and they're going, "Don't do it, don't do it." There's madness coming somewhere. So I think we're seeing a move on multiple levels of analysis, but the most important one for me is the work being done by Miriam Cates, as Keith has already said. Although I do think the transparency thing is a sticking plaster. I've got a video coming out about that later. I think it's a sticking plaster. Transparency is not the problem.
There is a point I'd like to make, Barry. Sorry for interrupting you. About the transparency issue, and it's like the devil is in the detail here. I think it's very, very important that all curriculum materials are made available to everyone. And the reason why is that these groups that are trying to promote gender ideology and critical social justice theories into schools, they want to embed their poison across the curriculum. They say this, they're explicit about this. And that means you'll have a maths lesson effectively trying to persuade the kids in the class that they're racist or they can change their sex. And the other thing is, we are often approached, and I'm sure Isla is as well, by parents who want a proxy to approach the school on their behalf because they do not want to rock the boat. They do not want their child to be disadvantaged by raising criticism of what's going on at the school. So those are the real big reasons why I think all materials available to everyone.
I'll tell you what, I mean, that is an incredibly important issue, but the fact that they have still got their mandate to teach gender identity is we're never going to be able to solve this issue until that is effectively removed from the edict. Now, one of the things that's really, really frightening me with regards to the actions of Gillian Keegan, and believe me, I have a whole load of them, but at the moment she seems to be fantasizing that she's going to be able to get away with this piecemeal approach, that they can allow some children to make their social transition on the basis of parental consent. So there's a whole host of different issues that come up here, which are all big. There's consent and parental responsibility. There's the whole issue around transition in itself, which basically, as we know, traps children into a position which is very difficult for them to exit, because of course they get huge amounts of affirmation from their friendship groups, and why would they want to be completely normal when they can get all of this special attention from being in one of these different groups. And essentially, they're not looking at it from a clinical abuse picture, a macro level, for the fact that actually there is no trans children, and that they've, smothered them in this whole gender nonsense and propagandized them, and that they need to take all of this away. Gillian doesn't want to look at the evidence. She doesn't want to move her position. She's still trying to put her trans rights activism upon this whole thing. So for as long as social transition is on the table, this is never going to go away. So I'm incredibly concerned with the stuff that I'm coming out with, despite the fact she's had numerous reports, from New Social Covenant, that Civitas, the Policy Exchange, etc., etc. Now, the other thing which is really concerning me is the fact that they're not relating this to being a massive safeguarding issue, right? Now, you'll see very little mention of the issue of the keeping children safe in education paper, and that is something which we should be calling upon, because at the end of the day, this is also an Equalities Act issue, because you've got two affected groups here who've got protected characteristics, who are fundamentally disproportionately affected, because you've got autistic children and you've got LGB children. So that's another facet, because if they actually went down the safeguarding route more, then we would be able to have more leverage to pull a lot of these children out. So what I'm seeing, and I don't want to go on to the next part, but what I'm seeing here with what she's doing in terms of social transition is she's trying to pull back on the trans child premise, right? She's trying to re-embed that to the point where we were trying to get away from it, and she's trying to reinstall it as much as she can. And I think that that's a huge, huge issue.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, the bottom line is social affirmation is an unethical intervention. It just should not be done, because the moment you affirm a child's incongruent gender identity, you are putting them at risk. So you're right, it's a safeguarding issue of getting on what's sometimes called the trans train, and they end up going to the next station on the stop, which is demanding puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, surgeries, and so forth. You know, the simplest, easiest way to stop a child going down that route is to say no, and to do it clearly, make sure that the state is behind the people that are saying no. You know, the big problem, one of the big problems we've got is there's so much information out there that implies that the child saying that they are the opposite sex might be right. And you know, we need to sweep all that away, and it's going to take decades, I think, to get rid of all that crap.
And yeah, carry on. Sorry.
But yes, it's unethical to affirm a child's incongruent gender identity is the point I'm getting. But there's also, you know, if you want to get down into the detail and say, well, actually, can we do some kind of fudge, compromise, find a consensus? I don't think we can. But you say, well, if we allow Freddie to be socially affirmed at school because his parents want it because they've been hoodwinked by mermaids or whoever. But Joanne's parents are saying, no, we're not having any of this, and we don't believe any child should be transitioned at all. You're immediately going to create division, upset, one rule for one, another rule for another, and it's going to create a whole raft of problems. Whereas if there's one simple rule, no social affirmation in schools, it's far easier.
It's signing teachers up for absolute warfare and a battle, and also it's like it clinically makes no sense at all, because all of it's built on a foundation of lies. It's not, you know, it's not pulling the kids out of what we know is an absolute fabrication. The other thing that came up over the weekend was this story, which is also in the Daily Mail today, which came up about the child who was transitioned, and it was a very familiar story to us all. Secretly transitioned by school. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat.
Me too.
But what was
let's have a coughing second and then get back on.
What was important was that the child had gone off to a GP who had secretly diagnosed them with gender dysphoria, which is out with their clinical purview, and also prescribed them puberty blockers. And that is the big part of the story that wasn't kind of taught quite enough about, in my opinion. So this kind of private, actions that some of the GPs are taking is a big concern, because, you know, the parents had no knowledge. And the school had agreed not to socially transition, but actually behind their back had socially transitioned a child. So
I think you bring up what is multiple strands, which as usual cover multiple areas. So you've got the educational issue.
Welcome to my brain, Barry.
Yeah, which is great. You know, you've got the medical issue and you've got the educational issue. From a medical perspective, there are people who believe in gender identity, and the fact that they believe in it is something we're going to have to recognise. It doesn't mean that we have to entrench gender identity ideology into the NHS or the medical system. With education, there are going to be people who believe in gender identity. That should be given no more truck than anybody who believes in anything else. It's just like a religious belief. Teachers are in an impossible situation. I'm completely torn about this teaching side, and I know that Keith's background is in teaching, my background is teaching. And what we're seeing is a group of people who simply don't have the guidance. And my first question is, hard though it may be, these are adults. You don't need guidance to tell you this is wrong. You just need to look. You know, curiosity is power, Isla. As I tell the warrior teachers, you know, you just need to look. So my concern for teachers is that we've got a group of teachers, a swath, you know, an enclave or whatever you want to call it, of teachers who have been taught this Paulo Freirian nonsense and critical social justice that Keith mentioned earlier. And that's been taught to them as if it's gospel, and they don't know any different. You aren't going to cure that unless you take definitive action. And that definitive action needs to be very clear, crystal clear, that the framework of belief that includes gender identity ideology has no place in British schools at all, because they're not just, it's not that they're teaching it, which they are in some cases, they're practicing it. They're practicing their nonsense religion in schools. They're essentially doing that. And then anybody, as Keith says about his parents, who my heart goes out to, any parent who speaks up is treated as a heretical blasphemer. This is blasphemy laws by the back door. This is blasphemy. It's the old religious reasserting their control over knowledge, which of course to those mindsets that they see as the power, which is what makes what we're seeing being taught in schools so unbelievably troubling. If it's being taught in schools to that manner, we're not stemming this by just simply saying, well, it's all right for some, innit? Some can do it, right? Nobody can do it, right? It needs to be called out for exactly what it is. There is no such thing. It's got to stop, full stop. Now, that's not going to happen while Gillian Keegan is doing what Gillian Keegan is doing. And that's my biggest concern, as you know, because we've already discussed this earlier, and I expect you've seen my video. My major concern around Keegan is the statement that she's got somebody who's going to provide these resources for free that teachers can or cannot use if they choose, who are a group of people who, let's be clear, were doing something that was a very good idea. You know, here, of course, I'm mentioning Oak Academy.
Tell us a little bit about that, because I know you did a video on it, didn't you?
I've done two now. I mean, Oak National Academy is something that's appeared from nowhere. It was actually put together before COVID to provide lesson plans for people who were homeschooling during COVID. And there was some incredible work done by teachers. So if teachers send this stuff in to the academy, and then that was, it was distributed out to people, rather like the stuff you'd get from the Times Educational Supplement or anybody, any other sort of, I suppose, what you would call a sort of treasure trove for teachers of stuff they can pull and use without having to go back to original design. This makes perfect sense to any teacher worth their salt would understand that that's worth doing. They've then been able to obtain some government funding to provide PSHE, RSHE stuff and other materials as well. These folks are doing some great work. They are doing some great work. But when you look at the PSHE curriculum, it's utterly horrifying. It is purely behaviorist. And by that, I mean, they're not teaching people to think, as Keith obviously praised the idea of teaching people to think earlier. They're telling people how to think, and they're telling people how to live their lives. And it includes stuff that the school has absolutely no business being involved in whatsoever. They are not there to teach children about vaping. They are not there to teach children about right-wing extremism. They are not, this is the purview of parents and the wider society to involve young people who are old enough. So do you want me to give you some examples? Because I got it here. Let me give you a quick example. So year 11, which is obviously they're, almost adults at that point, they're going to discuss with them things like safe and chemical sex. No, you aren't.
Is that like poppers and
No, it's not poppers. They're talking about chemsex parties and stuff. That's my thinking.
What to children? Chemsex parties?
No, hang on a minute. Right. First off, it's year 11, right? So
how old?
16 and over.
And the chemsex though?
Yeah, but the chemsex stuff's illegal anyway for anybody. It doesn't matter how old you are, right?
Well, what are they talking? Even I don't know much about that.
Well, it's not. I'm not saying that they shouldn't know about the dangers of chemsex parties. They should know the danger of chemsex parties. I'm saying it's not the school's purview to teach it.
I feel a bit sick thinking about that.
Yeah, what is a chemsex party?
Where everybody gets together and gets totally drugged up and has sex for days on end. You imagine the smell. Right? That's what they do. Right? It's like, do you remember in the 70s when they used to throw their keys in a bowl and say, screw my missus? You know all that stuff?
We've taken a bit of a turn.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So in addition to that, for example, they've also got right-wing extremism and the dark web. Who the hell are they talking about?
What?
Jordan Peterson? What do they mean by right-wing extremism? Women who want their rights? Is that what they mean by? There's no left-wing extremism in the curriculum, right? So I went to look and see exactly what's going on, and I did a video where I went to see who the top guy was, the top dog, so to speak, and I found him, and he's a full-on TQ plus nutter, ill-informed, or stupid. That's the only three possible outcomes. When you look at this guy's career and what he's done, he's doing absolutely amazing work on multiple levels. And then this, you're like, right, okay. Because, I mean, he absolutely threw gay people under the bus by saying that you should be thankful to, the trans black queer person who gave you your rights. It's extraordinary that this person is being given government money to run stuff for schools when it's blatantly obvious within 5 minutes of looking that he's completely captured by the TQ plus ideology. So what we're seeing is the overreach of schools. This is nothing to do with schools, nothing. They're trying to teach them how they have to think, not how to think. I'd love to see the curriculum for the dark web and right-wing extremism, wouldn't you? Because they're going to be talking about Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, or they're going to be talking about Andrew Tate. Where do they draw the line? Right? Where do they draw the line? And what makes Andrew Tate right-wing rather than left-wing? And what makes Jordan Peterson right-wing? They're politicizing the children at 16, right?
And then, of course, parents won't have access to this. So
they won't have access to it, right? So from my perspective, if you're 16 years old and you want to know about that stuff, it is not the school's job to tell you. It is not the school's job to be taking this much of an interfering approach to young people's lives. And this starts from year 7, right? So you've even got stuff in here. I mean, they've even got, so when they get to year 8, year 9, which is 14, then they've got eating disorders, body image, child sex abuse, abusive relationships, peer pressure, religion and culture, identity, and LGBTQI+. Is it any wonder these kids are depressed? To me, as an individual that looks at this from a cultural perspective, I see this for the behaviorist behemoth it is, because that's exactly what it is. If you want to take it down from culture and take it to politics, this is the lunatic left. You know, have sex with your Afghan, here's a 150-page manual. Right? So it's the other end of the sex should be between man and woman and it should only happen in the bedroom and 2 kids stuff. So so what they're doing is they're positing a situation whereby they're taking the place of the parent in the education of the child. And this cannot be allowed to stand. This cannot be allowed to stand. Parents need to recognize that, yes, this is a threat. But the bigger threat in my mind, and I'd very much like to hear what Keith thinks about this, the bigger threat in my mind is that they are usurping the parents' responsibility to teach their children about the world in which they live, which is not the purview of teachers, who should be teaching them what happens if you mix sodium with bloody magnesium, right? That's my take. And secondly, that we have to make sure that parents understand that parenting is a doing word, not a being word. Right, so we need a resurgence of parental responsibility. If there's no left-wing extremism in the curriculum, isn't that funny? Right, so there's something going on here that's innately political within that curriculum, as well as including ridiculous nonsense like growth mindset and brain. You know, it's all the corporate rubbish that I've seen throughout my lifetime is also in there, and this is just the list of headings. What the hell's in the content? What the hell is now? It may be that teachers have sent this all in and there's content that's available there. And we may simply have a situation where nobody is qualified to, or knows enough, or is capable of looking at it and going, right, that's a power and oppression narrative. Okay, that's straight out of queer theory and gender ideology. All right, that's critical race theory. Nope, rejected. Right, so it could be a quality issue, because there will be hundreds of good teachers who in their own time have put together resources for schools with every good thought there can be. There is no nefarious thing here, I don't think. I think it's simply a matter of the influx of information is so much. Back to what we said before about the transparency issue with Miriam, parents are busy folk, teachers are busy folk. You ask a head teacher, he'll tell you they're inundated. They are very busy people, right? So this obfuscating and screwing around really will only end, in my book, when we do 2 things. No to social transition, yes to teaching them that gender identity is a cracker's belief system, and no to PSHE in schools. It needs to stop. We need a moratorium until we can say, right, that bit goes into biology. They'll get that, right? And you don't need to teach them the rest of that. That's the parent's job. And then we send a letter to the parents saying, these topics, that's your job, not our job, because teachers don't want this. I don't believe they want this. I think PSHE is a boot on the face, a political boot on the face of teachers. That's where I think they are, and they're stuck, because most of them will be, you know, good, liberal, left, leading people who just want to do the best they can for the kids. I think it's a terrible imposition that's happening here. Keith, I would be interested to hear your take.
I'd like to know first up, Barry, whether you think that this whole movement to get our children to believe that they can change sex and that they're racists is a far left political movement.
I don't see it as a political movement in that respect. I see it as a cultural bubo, if you will. Right now, it is political. It's inherently political. It's inherently left, because it's totalitarian and it's collectivist. So it's bound to be inherently left. That doesn't stop it from being a great tool for the right, where there's money to be made. That's why they're marketing it. That's why they're, you know. So this idea that it's actually that we need to address it from a political point of view is, if we're not careful, a false trail. It's a cultural war. Now they say it's a culture war, and it's only a culture war. Well, Mao was only a culture war. The Nazis were only a culture war. This idiocy that seems to think that unless it moves down to politics, it's not a real war, is a problem for us all, because the culture war is where it starts. Culture is upstream of politics. And if we don't address the fact that we have got culturally dangerous ideological ideas, wherever they come from, that are going to bring about the ruin of children, then we are in serious trouble, because we don't come from a world that's filled with power and oppression narratives. We come from a world that lives in the utmost luxury, and many people around the world don't have that. And we've got to start with the positive measures, because this type of stuff that they're teaching kids is making them ill. You've only got to look at the mental illness statistics, the depression, and all the rates that come with it. Does that answer your question, Keith?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, you're right about the mental illness. We are raising a generation of kids to be so afraid that a generalized anxiety disorder is generalized across the population. There's a couple of points that you made are worth picking up on. One is this idea of domains, or purviews, I think is the word that you used, where, yes, so there's clearly some things that are the responsibility of the parent, and there are some things that are the responsibility of the school. And yes, I think the moral upbringing of a child and the relationships and sex education, by and large, apart from the facts, the mechanics, which are to be taught in school, everything else is within the domain of parenting. And the other point that you made, which I would like to amplify as a good one, when you said that parenting is what you do rather than what you are, absolutely right. It's and I go a little bit further than that, in that the parents that we see that are able to get their children out of this, because that is possible and it does happen, once they're sucked into the hole, they can be helped out, but that requires classic good parenting and a healthy dose of parent as leader.
Yes.
So I'm the one that makes the decisions. This is what we're doing, parents need to be encouraged to be like that, rather than the wishy-washy, oh, I want to be your friend, and isn't it lovely that we can go to the shops together and buy the same clothes. No, none of that. Let's, you're the parent, you're the boss, set your boundaries. And we can talk about mobile phone usage, maybe that's for another time, but these devices are a vector for sending these rubbish ideas into kids' heads just as much as schools are.
Let's all be Thabians, for an example, on TikTok. Mobile phones are a huge part of the problem, absolutely. I want to try and move us along, if that's okay, chaps, into how this interacts with the new NHS services. So basically, you and I, certainly, Keith, will have completed our NHS interim service specification stakeholder feedback, which went in on last Friday. Now, that came out, the feedback from the initial consultation that we did came out, and basically the short summary that hit Twitter, people said, this is great news. Puberty blockers are off the table. This is a win. It's all very good news. And I looked at those tweets and thought, I think you are confused, because this is not the case whatsoever. And obviously we were party to a stack of paperwork, so big, which basically told a completely and utterly different tale. And essentially my summary is that this is JIDS 2.0, except for a much better, much stronger ideologically captured service. And we're in big trouble, and puberty blockers are very much on the table. Trans kids are back on the table. Now, talk to us a little bit about what your hopes for were when you wrote your specification, because it's worth saying that none of what was said by gender critical people made it into the final output. It was all wholly, and this is my opinion, wholly from the other side.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we spent weeks putting together, I don't know how many pages it was, a submission in response to the consultation on the draft interim service specification.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When they finalised the specification, it had not changed in any material sense whatsoever. And you're absolutely right to pick up on the extra stakeholder consultation that they issued around the prescribing of puberty blockers. And yeah, the people who said, oh, isn't it wonderful the NHS have banned puberty blockers, were completely misled. And I'm sure that was the intention of the press releases and the documentation that the NHS put out. But the truth is this: they have said that puberty blockers are going to be only available under research, was their first line. But the second line then said puberty blockers will be available on a case-by-case basis, subject to review by a holistic team, multidisciplinary team, yada yada. But you know, how that team's constituted and what its members think is going to have a profound impact. And then the third one, and this is the one that really scares me, and they didn't provide any detail on it. On the stakeholder consultation, they provided it says link to the new specification, and the link was dead. It didn't actually work. But it said there will be a separate protocol for the prescribing of puberty blockers when they're being used as a precursor to, and I paraphrase here, you can't remember the exact wording, but as a precursor to the prescription of cross-sex hormones, which they called gender-affirming hormones. And again, as you point out, you know, the language, the use of language is actually going backwards here, and they're starting to use the language of the ideologue rather than you know, objective fact-based language. Now let's have a look at that. So what happens, isn't it? And I think it's pretty much what happened to Kira Bell, and it's certainly what has happened to a number of other patients that I'm aware of, is that when you've got what I call endogenous, that's it, you know, your body makes it. If you're a girl, it's you know, estrogen and progesterone. And that's endogenous in your body. And when the doctors come along and pump that girl full of testosterone, that's exogenous, it's coming from outside. So if you make the switch from an estrogen and progesterone based hormone system, endocrinology, in a person, and you're trying to make that switch to a testosterone based one, okay, what they do is they smooth the path out by staging it, saying, okay, well, we'll give you puberty blockers so it takes your female hormone system down, and then we put you on the testosterone so it ramps your the male hormone system up. So so it's like it's used as a like a stepping stone, if you like. And that's probably the most common use of puberty blockers in you know, the unethical practice of opposite sex imitation medicine. And yeah, that is actually labelled up as you know, a third separate route for the prescription of puberty blockers. So let's be clear, the NHS has not restricted the use of puberty blockers to research settings only. You can still get them on a case-by-case basis. You can still get them if you are moving on to opposite sex imitation hormone regimen.
And one thing that Barry and I and Robbie spoke about in a previous video that we did is that we don't believe that any one single child at all should be put on these horrific drugs. And I from the get-go said that just because someone is given a bit more information and signs a form doesn't mean that they can give informed consent about potentially losing their sexual function, you know, their ability to orgasm, potentially affecting their brain development, etc. bone health. One of the things that I did for the second part of the stakeholder consultation is I spent an inordinate amount of time going through the stakeholder company. So this whole undertaking was carried out by a company called Tonic. Now, who are Tonic? They are, in my opinion, another ideologically captured organization. Now, they, we looked at all of the different members of staff, and one in particular had form for writing quite an extensive LGBTQ prisons report. But essentially what I then did is I went through all of their literature review and all of the papers that they'd utilised, and I followed their methodology for their evidence review. And what I basically thought was that they had told the story as they wished it to be told, and they'd also left out other aspects because they were inconvenient to them. And so the whole narrative was set out from the get-go. And obviously I kind of filled this these points in my next stage of my report. But I think that the company, their whole mission was to exclude us, and it was biased. And I think that there's a lot of work and follow-up that could be done on that whole Tonic exercise. So, you know, that's not over. And if I get a bit more time, I'll microanalyze that whole consultation, because
I think what you're describing, I mean, this is more your purview than it is mine. I seem to be fond of the word purview today, Keith. I don't know why. Than mine. I think what you are describing is actually, I think it's Game of Thrones. I do. And I think what we're seeing is the appeasement of the sparrows. And that's the biggest problem we've got. The sparrows, of course, were a puritanical, totalitarian religious cult in the Game of Thrones. And what we're seeing is a both sidesism here, where we're beginning with the premise this is real. Whether it's in education or whether it's in medicine, the premise that they're beginning with is actually this is real. It's not real. None of it's real. Right? Every single last bit of it is not real. Every single bit. From whichever angle you take, from the point of view of queer theory, none of it's real. It's all just made up. It's just nonsense and guff from California, where everybody was stoned. If you look at critical race theory, originally a very useful tool within the legal system, that's now morphed beyond belief. Even Black Lives Matter wasn't what it pretended to be. Right? This is now all coming out. And if you look at gender identity ideology, well, you know as well as I do, it came straight off the back of Kinsey, to money, to De Chegley, to Susie Bloody Green, and to mermaids. None of it is real. And my concern is that we are succumbing to a narrative in which people do not understand that this nonsense has been percolating in academia for many, many years. And that the first premise of any report, whether it be by Hilary Cass, who I understand must be doing a very difficult job in an extraordinary situation, any premise should be, none of this is real. There is only a child with distress. How do we deal with that child with distress? Well, the first thing is education. What do we do about the parent? Education. Lay it cold and hard. I've said this before. You lay it cold, you lay it hard, you give it all, as bad as it gets, and then you tell them, "Is that what you want for your child?"
Well, there was no mention of any epidemiological inquiry about what they would do about this, you know, social contagion, about the fact they had all of this data, or, you know, they would make mention of the fact that they were they were going to do autism assessments, but no mention of what they would do in light of that. You know, would that then exclude people?
Well, I think it's an interesting factor, and really it was. I hate to harken back to the orange guy, but that speech by Trump, whoever wrote it, was very concise, and it certainly is needed to be listened to, just so you can see what's going on. It strikes me as who wrote that knows exactly how to deal with this. You know, it's what we're seeing is that the states bizarrely go further in the extremity of the damage to children, but yet seem to be turning around at a far faster rate than we are, which makes me think that the British are the Ents in Lord of the Rings. You know, it's a long time to do. So what we're seeing is I believe it is an attempt to both sides this by saying, well, actually, if we do this, nobody will get hurt. No, if you do this, everybody will get hurt. Everybody, right? Because the only solution to this Hobson's choice is some folk are going to get hurt. That's what culture wars do. And the sooner we swallow the bullet, not the bullet, what do I mean? swallow the medicine. The sooner we swallow the medicine or take the bullet, the sooner we can end this. You know, the Cass report should have begun with the words, gender identity ideology is a belief system and has no foundation in science. That's the first line. And if that wasn't the first line, we start again. Now, secondly, before I let you come in, Keith, I'm rabbiting, but before I let you come in, secondly, what we're not seeing is a holistic approach. When they're talking about holistic approaches in the Cass report, what they're saying in the specifications for the NHS, what they're saying is we're doing a holistic approach within the walled garden of the belief system of the genderists. It's that simple. That's what they're doing. They're simply playing in the same puddle. I think the problem we've got is that there was, as we know, a strict remit given to Cass. It will be within these boundaries and no further. That remit's not wide enough, and I keep saying it. People must be sick to death of hearing me say it. We need a full public inquiry that examines education, business, charity sector, NHS, quangos, anybody else, to see whether or not they're infected with this virus, which is what it is. What it is, a parasite or a virus, as Gadsab puts it. And I think that until we get somebody who's able as a politician to stand up and essentially say, okay, we're going to end this, that in fact, it's just going to continue to fester and bubble and keep popping up again and again and again. Because you only have to look at that curriculum for PSHE, which has come from many teachers, I imagine, all around the country who are doing work for them, that we've got an endemic problem. And that endemic problem is that people believe this cobblers, and it's got to stop. Well, you're going to be one hell of a politician that stands up and goes, okay, folks, you want me in power, I'll do X. And we need somebody that would do that. And at this point, I think Rishi and his crew, I don't know what the hell they're playing at, if they're going to stop this culture war from becoming a real political war, should stand up and do so. Well, I can't see that happening. Can you?
No.
In which case, what's the next 5 years going to be like? Hell on earth. Hell on earth.
Keith, what were your because I want to take us into another territory. What do you want to round him up?
Well, obviously, I totally agree with Barry. You know, we need to be totally objective about this. But I just wanted to make a couple of points about the Cass review while we're on that subject, and then, yeah, obviously we'll move on. One is that when the Cass review was first established, yes, the remit was wrong. It was certainly wrong in terms of age. It should have gone to up to 25, because that is actually the NHS long-term plan for mental health, is to actually define adolescents out up to 25, and there's a programme in place to do that. So why on earth the Cass review wasn't aligned with the NHS stated strategy of making adolescents go to 25, I don't know. Second, the Cass review, when it commenced, and I highlighted this at the time, so we're talking well over 2 years ago now, was they said they were going to seek consensus. And here we go. Consensus is utterly impossible when you've got two positions. One, objective facts, which I think we agreed that, you know, we're arguing for. And we, you know, if somebody comes up with a new fact, we'll quite happily accept it if it can be demonstrated that it is a fact. And these ideologues pushing their completely false belief system. And there is no common ground. There is no area for consensus between those. So the Cass review was doomed to fail simply on that basis. And if you look at the topic report, which you referred to earlier, you will recall, you will see that they highlighted the responses to the submissions to the draft interim service specification as being in two groups, Group A and Group B. And Group A were basically those supporting the transgender activists position, and Group B, those supporting the concerned parents position. And as we discussed earlier, it was the activist position which was embedded in the final specification. You cannot have compromise or consensus in this. There is right and there is wrong. And, you know, you can accuse people like me, if you like, of indulging in black and white thinking, and that's can be perceived to be a mental disorder in certain circumstances, but not in this one. It is black and white. You know, giving a kid a sex change is wrong. End of story. And we should be eliminating all the pathways that lead to that, right back to the germ of the idea that is planted in their heads in school and in social media and in YouTube videos and so on and so forth.
I couldn't agree with you more, Keith. But again, here we've now got an ideological position where I disagree with both of you. Now that's an interesting one, isn't it? In that I don't care what people over 18 do, and I think that the remit to deal with those people is education. Right? I don't care. And I think the creep of the NHS into people's lives and defining adolescence until 25 is actually a problem. So I disagree with you profoundly on this. Years ago,
so on the 17 to 25 bit, you disagree?
Absolutely, profoundly.
Okay.
Profoundly.
Well,
right?
let's have a scrap then.
Yeah, let's have a scrap, right? Okay.
Come on, let's get.
Right.
Come on, give us your
part of the reason that this problem exists in our society is because we are relying upon a therapeutic society in which everything is seen through the lens of the therapeutic. Now, Frank Freddy wrote about this 30 bloody years ago. He was prescient in writing about it. Okay, that what's being taken as a given is the idea that we as humans are fragile creatures that are not well or capable of falling unwell very easily, and it's a mental health sales drive. That's what it is, right? Human beings thrive best when they have something to thrive against, right? So when we experience great discomfort, when we experience terrible hardship, we're in a situation then when people come to the fore and actually you find, you know, the best part of you. There's the old statement, isn't there, about when man looks into the abyss, he finds his character, which is a very, very good metaphor for what's happening now. Is that we're not being allowed to look into the abyss anymore. And this protectionist framework that comes directly from the medicalization and the therapeutic nature of our society is a huge driver in the engine room of this nonsense. A huge driver. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, but this is classic you in terms of your kind of cultural and behavior and all the rest of it.
Yes, classic me.
This is just it's much more simple than that. This is about medicine. This is about clinical evidence. This is about epidemiology. This is about mortality and morbidity. You know, this is about healthy bodies, and taking, you know, people who are not fully developed and completely putting them on a pathway of doom.
No, I agree. I wasn't talking directly about that. I'm not saying it's not a threat.
But you have to.
Right. I'm not saying it's a threat to young people. I'm saying it is a threat to young people. What I'm saying is that the NHS extending adolescence is a massive mistake. A massive mistake.
They're
going to say that they're saying that
if we get talking, Keith, you just have to jump in. Go on, Keith.
Yeah, right.
Give him a gap. Go on.
So what Keith said was that they're extending adolescent mental health to 25.
The NHS has got a stated strategy of adolescent mental health being extended up to the age of 25. And
this is a huge mistake.
Right. I'm going to both agree and disagree with you, Barry, on this at the same time. Cop that. So one, I totally agree with you about the pathologizing of everything. I think that is totally wrong. You know, oh, you're depressed, there's a pill for that. I'm not a big fan. The whole staring into the abyss thing, yeah, absolutely. Kids need to do that, but they need to do it in a safe environment where they're not going to fall into the abyss.
Why? Why? They don't know. They do not need a safe environment. We're talking about 18 plus here, right?
Well, yeah, hold on.
Adults, right? Adults.
You're jumping around. Are you talking about sort of things like psychiatry and because that's where that framework will come from? The idea of taking them underneath the umbrella of acute mental health care within the NHS. Absolutely.
I mean, not just acute, chronic as well. I mean, yeah, there's a whole idea of, you know, if you're somebody presenting with generalized anxiety disorder or depression or that sort of thing, because we know that the adolescent brain is going through, you know, this rapid pace of development, which some young people find difficult, and it tends not to settle down until 25. So that is the rationale behind saying, well, okay, those people's needs are defined by their state of brain maturity, and adults, if they're defined by their state of brain maturity, then they tend to be typically over 25. So that's a rationale for doing it, and I support it. But what I do not support, and I think Barry's likely to agree with me on this part, is that we should provide tons of treatment and therapy and what have you else. Life would be far better if we made these people resilient, so they didn't actually need to use these services, so that these services then really are available just for edge cases. I'd certainly concur with that point of view, if that's what Barry's arguing for. And I'd also go back, if I might, just sorry, Barry, I just want to finish my last point, and it is my last point on this one. And this is about the idea of bodily autonomy in over 18s. And I just want to say that, and Isla touched on this earlier as well, is I genuinely do not believe that a 20-year-old can give fully informed consent to opposite sex imitation treatments. Okay, so you need to have a framework within which we can help adolescents avoid such medicine. So I think, in a way, the way the system's designed, because at the moment it is as captured as you described, Barry, then yes, what you say is absolutely right. But if we can imagine a situation where we're dealing with rapid intervention for cases where the kids have gone completely off the rails and flaky, and we need to help them get out of the hole they've fallen into, that kind of mental health service I do approve of. So so it's qualified. I don't accept 25.
I would agree with you. Talking to a friend of mine who works in the field of body dissociation and body dysmorphia. These are terribly ill people, and those are the people that we want to protect. And I've got no issue whatsoever with them getting the protection they need. The problem I've got is if we start to mold our country around the idea that those that are psychologically unwell in some way have an indicator of how everybody else should be in order not to be psychologically unwell, then we're going down a very dark path indeed. The problem I've got is that fundamentally, over the years, I don't, the 18 to 25 thing, that really needs looking at, right? Because the simple fact of the matter is you don't wait for somebody to walk for their legs to be fully grown. So it doesn't wash with me, right? If they're 18 or over and they want to pay for this, they've got agency, they can do it. What do you want to do, section them? Right, they can do it. Now, the problem is that people that are unwell, who genuinely think this is going to help them, are the rare people that we genuinely want to help. The others who are going, well, I'll have this done. They will have it done and go, oh my God, what have I done? Because they got caught up in the whole milieu. So we have a situation whereby we have to be careful and say that although, of course, what happens to that individual is a medical issue, what happens to that person is a psychological issue, and what happens to them afterwards when they become a detransitioner is another medical issue. The whole damn thing wouldn't exist if we dealt with it at an educational level to begin with and said, no, we will not have social transition in schools, gender identities, cobblers along with the rest of it. So we have to look at where do we start, I think.
I do agree.
I agree.
I do agree with you. I agree with you both on this, and
oh damn! It was supposed to be a good fight.
I don't know, because I think we're in some ways we're talking at cross purposes, because there's parts we're basically, I think the gender issue is one, but I think one of the reasons that the NHS has done this is because it's actually role modelling. It's looking at this from an executive function in terms of NHS funding. And one of the problems with mental health services within the NHS is that they are absolutely flooded with this population of 18 to 25s in acute psychiatry because of the problems with CAMS, the child and adolescent mental health services. Because if you look at acute psychiatric wards at the moment, they're absolutely flooded with young girls, particularly, who are also this same subpopulation, who are fitting into the gender nonsense, who have incredibly high levels of suicidal ideation, self-harming, or who are being diagnosed, which I don't agree with borderline personality disorders. They're coming in with DID systems, multiple personalities. All of this is being flooded via TikTok and social media, etc.
Sybil.
But the amount of they're really, really in crisis, and they're absolutely chock-a-block to the point where they're being sent all over the country because there aren't enough beds in acute psychiatric units. And I think that's one of the reasons why they've done this centralised 18 to 25 extra special funding, and because they are an unstable population at the moment. But if you go back, that's a bigger cultural issue, which feeds into this, you know, gender nonsense again that we're talking about. Because I do agree, you know, there is a danger in then taking this adult population and infantilizing them because of their agency, as we're talking about.
Well, we're doing it with everybody else.
Yeah,
what makes you think they wouldn't do it with them?
There's ins and outs of this, but anyway, let me use admin privilege to draw us back to where we were before we all had a bit of a breakdown. So we were talking about the executive function in terms of funding, and one of the things that we looked at with the NHS service specification and how this interacts in terms of puberty blockers and the new GIDS 2.0, etc., is the form. This was set up and written, so I don't believe that, and we did a video on this, Barry and Robbie and I, we believe that this wasn't done by Dr. Hilary Cass. This was done by the Specialist Commissioning Group with James Palmer and Michael Brady and all of that team. Now, one of the things which happened was that some of the people who were part of this commissioning in writing the new ideological service were some of the previous GIDS staff, who then have now left, and they have now set up this new service called Gender Plus. And it's Gender Plus that I now want to talk about, if that's okay, because I think that this is an important story that needs to get out there. Now, Gender Plus is obviously sitting in wait now, okay? So they are waiting for the news to, you know, this final setup to be revealed. And they're essentially ready to go. Now, some of the things that I'm incredibly worried about with them are some of the people who are in situ. Now, they're all clinical psychologists. So if you're looking at their website, you know, they're all called doctor, but they're not clinical, they're not medical doctors, they're PhD doctors. What the person who they have down as the person who will to be doing clinical prescribing is a nurse called Paul Carruthers. So that's that part of the story that I want you just to hang on to. Now, what I think that they did, and is I think that they had involvement perhaps in the design of the new GID service. And they had some knowledge. And what I think that is happening is that they know that they will benefit, because if the puberty blockers are on the table via these research trials, and they can then go off and attract parents into their private service potentially to prescribe them puberty blockers, because that's also within the interim service specifications, that anyone who is privately on them will be effectively welcomed into the NHS system and almost fast-tracked onto a clinical trial. So private clinics will benefit. Now, one of the things which I think is interesting about these people, so there's this person called Dr. Iggy Moon, who you will know, who is a real trans activist, who's part of this coalition against conversion therapy, which is a kind of, you know, gender affirmative person. They also have Dr. Aidan Kelly, who will be another familiar name to you, but there's another person who I want to talk about for a little bit, and this person is called Enrich Kritzinger. Now, he's the director of the company Gender Plus, and his wife Samantha. Now, let me just read you. This guy has written a book. Now, this is the thing that I think is interesting about this whole story of Gender Plus. He wrote a book, and the little blurb for the book says, "Growing up in insecurity without a father's love, suffering sexual abuse at home and then at school, Enrich fully embraced the gay lifestyle. His search for love was insatiable, but ultimately he felt empty, disappointed, desperate and unfulfilled. But through a growing relationship with Jesus Christ, Enrich allowed God's unconditional love to permeate and saturate the delicate areas of his gender and sexuality. Today, happily married to Samantha, his passion is to reach people like the old him, who are trapped in gender and sexual confusion, this story invites the reader into a radical, loving, life-changing relationship with the Heavenly Father, challenging and inspirational. Now, this guy is now running Gender Plus. So what does that book, the spec for that book, say to you about what a guy running a trans clinic? Because I know what it says to me, but what does that say to you?
What's gay conversion therapy?
Okay, what does it say to you, Keith?
I haven't really had. I'm a bit of a slow thinker, so I tend to digest things over a bit of time. Yeah, it's
okay. So let me give you a bit more information then. So on his Facebook feed, he it's serious. We're talking mega Baptist, I think, hallelujah type of serious.
From America?
Him and his wife, South African.
Right.
But the other interesting thing that I think potentially is that, and obviously I'm sort of thinking gender GP here. The nurse that I told you about, Paul Carruthers, nurses can prescribe medicine, but there is a medical doctor's name above the door, right? Usually. Now, Enric's wife, Samantha, is a doctor, an anesthesiologist who has her own company. So I'm suggesting potentially that she is the name above the door. And all the information that looks to me is like a very interesting idea about potentially, homophobic Christian type of, a bit confusion. And if it's not, and I'm wrong, I'll happily, hold my hands up and say, I think that's wrong. But for me, I think that this all sounds like a very, very dodgy setup.
I think it's extraordinary. I think it's quite extraordinary.
You could interpret it that way as it being, good old fashioned conversion therapy, and they're converting gay kids into trans.
Well, I think
for reasons of religious
pervert.
Well, yeah. It's,
I think
I'll tell you what. I will make a point though on Gender GP and on Gender Plus and on the NHS. And on the adult clinics, which are, it's almost like why do we need Gender Plus? I suppose it's for the under 18s, because the over 18s at the moment, they can just walk straight into Indigo in Manchester and get what they want, and it's easy peasy. And they describe themselves as bi, trans, for trans. And I rang the alarm bell on this over 2.5 years ago, and nobody seems to have taken a blind bit of notice of it. This whole gender affirming so-called approach, that is what we need to kill off, and that would kill off Gender GP. It would stop Gender Plus. It would stop these adult Wild West clinics, and for that to happen, we need the General Medical Council to accept that so-called gender-affirming care, I prefer to call it opposite sex imitation medicine, is not good medical practice. That needs to happen. They need to say that. So in UK law, and I'm going off a bit, but it's sort of like, what do we do about Gender Plus? In UK law, accepted medical practice is defined as something that is carried out by a responsible body of medical opinion. And at the moment, they are relying on WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, as being the responsible body of medical opinion. And I would say first up that they're not responsible. So they might be a body of medical opinion, they might meet that definition, but they certainly don't meet my definition of responsibility. And then the second point that you can pick up on whether something should be accepted medical practice or not is whether it's logical or not. And I think Barry is probably absolutely superb at destroying the logic, well, there isn't any logic, is there, of opposite sex imitation treatments. And so I think if we were to get rid of the gender pluses and the gender GPs and the adult clinics and opposite sex invitation in general, I think that's something that pressure needs to be applied, and the GMC need to say no, this just is not acceptable.
Well, I think you raise a very good point, and I think we get back to what's going on in the political arena with this bloody this conversion therapy bill. Well, it's easy. You just write it into the conversion therapy bill, and it's over. You can shut them down overnight, but nobody's going to do it, right? Until we get so everything we're discussing is, of course, very important because it gets the public awake. We're not going to. This is only going to happen step by step, I think, and it's going to happen by folks talking and meeting up and doing things and actually getting involved. And we know this is true. We know this is true, right? So from my perspective, conversion therapy bill should state quite clearly that that practice that they are doing, that practice of affirming gender, to affirm the idea of the falsehood of gender identity is conversion practice. It's that simple. And it should say that in the law, right? And then all you do then is arrest them and prosecute them under the law. Right, but no, they won't do it because nobody will make a declarative statement because we haven't seen a leader since I don't know when. Give me a leader. That's all I want. I don't care which side. Just give me a bloody leader, and then we'll deal with the fallout afterwards. Right? Let's get this. People, people keep saying to me, "Oh, they're going to come for you next." I know they're going to come for us next. What do you think I've been doing for the past 4 years? They're going to come for the gays next, which is exactly what's on the list. If you're that way inclined. Right, and this is the first sign from what Isla's telling me today. Of course, I could be wrong, as Isla said, she could be wrong. From what I'm seeing, this is the first sign that there is a gestational movement in this country to eradicate gay people from the public sphere. That's what it is, and let's call it what it is. It's a gay conversion therapy clinic. That's what it is.
It could be always been that from the start. Could be completely wrong.
Yeah, of course we could. Yeah.
Why would you be a super duper, why would you have written a book with that story, then set up a clinic like that? It's very odd.
Well, I don't think it's odd at all. Honestly, I don't think it's odd at all either. And the reason I don't think it's odd is because what came out of the NHS specification guidelines that we discussed earlier on in this session gave them the footing for the business plan.
Yeah,
it gave them the footing for the business plan, and all they're doing is building a business. And that business's product is despair, the destruction of the body, the exploitation of young people. That's what it is. It is a business, if we're right, wholly based upon the idea that there must be a flesh sacrifice to please the cult. It's disgusting. And it's interesting because Keith mentioned Indigo. Good choice of name, that, wasn't it? Remember the Indigo children? Good choice of name, right? None of this is by mistake in some circles. And I always say at Hanlon's Razor, I think we've covered this in the Warrior Teacher program either. Hanlon's Razor, never put down to wickedness what you can put down to stupidity, but the spiders are still there whether you like it or not. And every now and again, one crawls out the woodwork, and we need to identify who these people are and get them gone.
I don't believe in coincidences. This is a big picture thinking.
Yeah.
Too many things are all slotting together at the moment.
If we're right.
Yeah, if we're right.
And I would certainly advocate, being 100% on it, as it were. I do sincerely hope you're wrong. But what's that old saying about a conspiracy theory? About it in 5 years later, it becomes everybody goes, oh yeah.
Well, I mean, it's that old thing about just because you think everybody's against you doesn't mean that they aren't.
Yeah.
It's that idea that actually sometimes paranoia is justified. Curiosity is justified.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think all these things demand scrutiny. That if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then yeah, let's make sure that.
I mean, that blurb on the book.
Yeah.
Is every homophobic trope in the world.
It is, isn't it?
I haven't read it. I'll take your word for it. But
I haven't read the book, but that blurb made me.
It's like, okay, right.
That's a bit weird.
I'm sorry, I haven't read the blurb, but I'll happily get back to you on it, and I'll probably end up agreeing with you.
Keith,
sorry, I just want to pick up on one thing that Barry said. that is that the world, our country, is crying out for some leadership on this. Absolutely right. You know, we might have it in the likes of Miriam Cates and Nick Fletcher, who we mentioned right at the start. But yeah, we need somebody bold as brass to stand up and say, look, this is absolute tosh, and this is what needs to be done about it. And I am going to plough on and plough on and plough on until I get all these things done about it. And that is what we all need.
Well, do you want to sign us off then, Keith? You know, it's been really, really lovely to have you. I've enjoyed talking to you very much. I think we've covered lots and lots of issues. You know, I know that our duty will go from strength to strength. Have you got other countries that you're hoping to set up in, or what's the plan?
Well, the way we set up in another country is that we start encouraging enough people in that country to start networking, and then if somebody then, you know, if a leader emerges, then we establish a formal chapter. We call it branch if you like, but we call them chapters just. And so that process can take up to a year, you know, as people get enthused, and they and you need sort of what we call critical mass. But so the most recent edition was Canada, which was about 8-9 months ago officially. But obviously, from what I've just said, you'll realise that Canada started brewing about 20 months ago, and so we've got a few countries and/or regions that are in the same position
pipeline
Canada was.
Amazing.
Yeah. Do you know, it's good and it's obviously bad, because every single new parent that joins us is evidence of another child having been
another tragedy
by this evil. And it's another family that's been torn apart. I mean, the heartbreak, the grief, the actual mental trauma on the parents alone is huge. And of course, you know, what is happening to their children is 10 times worse and more. So it can be very emotionally draining. But yeah, those parents that are actually willing to stand up and do something, they are absolutely amazing. And you know, the highest profile one now is Erin Friday in the United States. I think she's absolutely incredible. You know, it takes a special kind of person to actually to stand up and stick your name on your head and go out and do this.
Yeah, definitely.
There are not many of us,
No.
And I look forward to the day when that changes and we can all be just open and honest about who we are, what we stand for, and the fact that, you know, our business is the health and safety of children. At the end of the day, this is a pure health and safety thing. And if we want to go back to what Ian Court said when we met yesterday, Isla, and Barry touched on as well in what he was saying, where you look at RSHE, whatever combination of initials you want for it, if you're going to teach them anything, teach them health and safety.
Well, that sounds like a good note to end on. So thank you very much, lads, and all the best.
Great to see you.
Indeed.
See you later.
Take care. Bye-bye.